Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order, the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 26th, 2024. I'd like to begin with our land acknowledgement. The town of Hinton respectfully acknowledges that it is located on the First Peoples traditional lands. We recognize this traditional territory to show respect and understanding to those who walked this land since time immemorial. Today, we uphold our ongoing responsibility to work together in the spirit of the intent of the treaties with all the First Peoples and nations that call this place home. The town expresses gratitude for the opportunity to build a better community on these sacred lands for generations to come. And with that, the meeting is called to order at 4 p.m. We will begin with the adoption of the agenda. Council, do we have any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda? Seeing none, CAO.
Thank you, Chair. No changes from us.
Great. Councillor Race. Councillor Race, just 1 second. Can you try that again, Councillor Race? Nope.
We, that committee adopt the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, any discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll call to question. If you can please vote electronically now. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We will move to Citizens Minute with Council. So just for those in the audience who may wish to speak today, the question was, are we going to try and give everyone a chance to speak because there potentially might be a large number? Absolutely, yes. But due to the potential large number, I'm sure you can understand we have a full agenda. What we will do, and I want you to know beforehand, is we will limit those comments to a minute, literally, just to give those people a chance to speak who may want to speak. The other thing is, if there's materials that are contained within the 58-page package that was submitted, Council has gone through those. So if you could please, if your plan is to simply read into something that has already been submitted with that, Council's seen it already. It may give somebody else a chance to speak who hasn't had a chance to speak yet. But with that, my intention is to let all those who would like to speak. We will forego the usual registration with Jen. The one thing I would ask is that if you are going to speak, if you can come up, ladies, I apologize. It'll be a little bit of a dance at first. We'll have you come, sit down, identify yourself to the microphone so that we can record that. We'll time you. If you hear a beep from Councillor Hawes's phone, that's your minute up. So again, just out of respect for everybody who wants to be part of the process. So minute with Council. If you could just raise your hand and then I'll identify you. Sir, if you wouldn't mind coming forward, please. And then again, sorry, our usual fare while you're coming up. Please keep your remarks concise, limited to 1 minute. If you could address the chair, which is myself for this meeting. Avoid asking questions simply because Minute with Council isn't designed as a Q&A session. It's that chance to interface with yourself towards Council for a minute. And just please maintain a respectful tone and language. Sir, if you could identify yourself.
Dancing. Asniawasis is my name. And for those that don't speak Cree, it's Stone Child. But the Rocky Mountain, Rocky Mountain Cree. There's a couple of things that I'd like to talk to you about. The Métis flag is hanging. Do you have a representative here from the Métis Association? Treaty 6 flag is hanging here. Do you have a representation from Treaty 6? This new thing that we're all looking at for this walkway and stuff, have you consulted any of the Indigenous people in the area? If you have not, we should not be having this meeting because you guys have done your your due diligence. So I don't know why we're having this meeting, because you have not done any of what is required for any advancement, especially on Crown land. You have done nothing, so this meeting should be adjourned as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Ms. Schwartz?
Hi, my name is Diane Schwartz. I am a resident of Aspen Heights, and I just wanted to touch base on a comment that Mayor Nissen had touched on in the last meeting you had October 8th regarding the parking lot that was going to be located at the corner of Highway 16 and Township Road 505A. And the comment that he made was that he was concerned about overflow parking. And that has, in my mind, brought up a very dangerous situation. When you're going up the incline of that road, you're directly looking in the sunlight from 3:30 to 4:30 in the winter months. And in the early evening months, again, when you're going up that road, you're looking directly into the sunlight, which blinds you. So you need to always be cognizant if there are any cars parked on either side of that road. So we are usually more centered as we're going up that road. So any new individuals using that area, going up that road would not be, have knowledge of that.
Thank you. Sir?
Hello, my name is Darren Byrne. I'm a Yellowhead resident. I've lived in Aspen Heights for the last 12 years. My concerns are three mainly. Consultation been very limited. Nothing from the Pathway to the Park Committee to any of the people living in the neighborhood. The map of the proposed route actually didn't become knowledge to most of us until after the presentation was made to you October 8th. It seems that it's maybe been undisclosed to try to minimize objection. Alberta Parks did contact me. I was one of only a few residents that was contacted by them. I voiced my concerns. I don't really believe they were heard. I asked them 3 times to organize a meeting with the area residents. They did not do so as yet. Pretty disappointed to see that they have already approved the trail management plan. The route is mostly overlaps existing trails. They're telling me that they're going to run this trail alongside the existing trails. I don't take any comfort in that. I'm a hunter. I have been for many years in the area. I'm sure that after they spend $12 million on this and make it a protected asset, there's no way I'm going to be allowed to walk down the side with my rifle. I guess I'm out of time, but I'm also very concerned about the wildfire risk with the huge number of tourists that they're proposing will be there. Okay, thank you.
It's just, also for anybody who may speak, if you don't get through all of your comments, but you want to make sure that they're shared with council, please feel free to email council@hinton.ca. That comes to all of councilors all at once, so you can still get those concerns through us that way as well. Anyone else? Sir at the back? Just 1 second.
Oh, yeah, you betcha. Hello, I'm Logan Edward Pankew. I'm just here to ask, how embarrassing is this town? Let me tell you, this town has been around for 67 years. There are very few things that this town has built or completed for finished infrastructure. This town is so embarrassing that we can't walk from anywhere in this town on a continuous sidewalk. I find it almost hilarious that there are town dollars being spent on a sidewalk to some guy's gold mine. I think Yellowhead County, Jasper National Park, or Alberta Parks, or the guy that owns the gold mine that the trail's leading to, should be paying for this. I think this town should finish the sidewalks in this town before finishing a walking trail to somebody's gold mine or to nowhere. You cannot even walk from the Green Square to Walmart on a continuous sidewalk. How embarrassing. Thank you very much.
Folks, the one thing I will ask though, and I understand that emotions might be high with some of you. If we can, just try and keep it respectful, please. However you feel, we're here to listen to folks from all points of view. So again, just temper your comments, please. Otherwise, what has to happen, I have to rule you out of order. I have to stop you from speaking. It makes me feel weird. Certainly will make you feel weird, but I'll have to do it. So please. Anyone else? Sir.
Hi, folks. I'm Warren Kerr. I'm a resident of the Aspen Heights area. I've lived there for a lot of years. Have a background in wildfire, putting out wildfire, including wildfire in that area that the trail is proposed. Folks, we're energized because of what we saw at Jasper happen this year. We've seen it happen at Whistleheads and other communities. We have some very significant fire risk in that area out there. And people start fires. They don't mean to, but people start fires. The more people, the more fires. We really have to be diligent about the whole fire issue out there and the whole fire risk out there. And, it's not only, it's a county issue, it's a town issue. We're neighbors, and it's coming home. If we get something out there like, say, Jasper had, or some of the other communities in recent years, it's coming home to all of us. So I think we have to be very diligent about how we deal with that whole risk situation there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Anyone else? Ma'am?
Hi, I'm Alicia Humphreys. Okay. So I've been a resident of Hinton for a long time. I'm a user group out in the Aspen Heights area. We are part of the off-road community that uses that area. And I feel that it's a way to make way for a new user group while kicking out a bunch of other user groups. If a new user group is in there, that's going to be a paved path. We're going to lose the off-road capabilities, the hunters, the et cetera. You guys know all about that. We've put a lot of hours. We respect the trails. We build the trails. We maintain them. We clean them. And now they're being marked and flagged by a whole bunch of people. And we're trying to clean the garbage out of there. So I don't feel that kicking one user or a bunch of user groups out to make a different group of users happy is the right way to go.
Thank you. Mr. Woodley?
Well, I'll just try and hit the high points. Okay. I inputted to the forestry planner there in June of this year, and then I talked to her last week. The funding to build this trail has to be secured and fully funded before the trail can be built. That's an aspect there. Yellowhead County has not indicated they support the trail and has not invested any money in developing this opportunity. The 12 million price tag will likely be our tax dollars from the province, county, or town of Hinton. Hundreds of thousands annually to operate this trail. So say the society, the vice chairman's statement in the original presentation in the town council, December 21st, 2021. We are not pretending that this society will have much life after. So their intention was to give it off to people to operate and spend the money to do that. Society could give up their management and it will ultimately go to the parks to operate and maintain the trail, and the town will have their share. So you guys will probably get that. I don't foresee any significant boost to the town or county tourist business or town citizen utilization that would justify the $12 million plus expenditure and annual support. It's obvious to me that the main driver are the key business owners past Wild Horse Lake that it goes to in phase 2, who are on the trail, society executive. The long-term plan would be connect their businesses.
Mr. Woodley, I apologize, but it has been over a minute. I do know you have well-researched info. If you could just pass it on to us through the email, I think, and I know you have already previously.
I had sent it to your personal ones, but
yeah, I got yours.
But I got a thing back saying the server rejected it.
Okay.
But you did get it, okay?
Yeah, I
That's
did.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Sir.
Name is Rod Hallam. I live in the area, Muscuda Estates, just across the highway. Lived there for over 30 years. And I just want to clarify that Yellowhead County does not support it. It's not that they are against it. but they have taken the presentation from the pathway to the park for information only, and that they feel they've got other things to do right now, and they are non-committal for either supporting or not supporting it at this time. And they are hearing a lot of Yellowhead County residents opposed to it. And I got that from our county councillor within the last couple of hours. So I just want to clarify, because I know the impression has been tried to be out there that Yellowhead County now supports it.
Thank you, Mr. Hallam. Anyone else? Bill?
First, I'd like to thank Councilor Ryan Magoon with allowing us all to come in here tonight from next door. You can hit the start button now. Hello, my name is Bill McDonald. Thank you for allowing us to speak tonight. I agree with a pathway, a local Hinton one that extends and connects all the paths in our community. If the current pathways can be resurfaced correctly, along with the cracks and the potholes, and then connected with the Beaver Boardwalk, the bike park, Mary Reimer Dog Park, the disc golf, the museum, the riverfront park, wouldn't that make more sense? Our Hinton attractions were built just not for the community, but tourism. We can most certainly build upon that first. Maybe by fixing, extending our local pathways first, you may find some recreation land around it that can be resold later, okay, as commercial land, which maybe a local brewery can take over. Okay, thank you for your time and Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Bill. Again, I'm not a big one for taking credit for things that aren't mine. That's not my style. That was administration and council working to make sure everybody was comfortable. So thank you. Anyone else care to speak? Okay. We do have a delegation on the agenda, so we will move on to the delegations and presentations. Presentations, they are limited to 10 minutes. So for fairness, we'll do the same thing. We'll set the timer at 10 minutes. I know it was a 58-page package. Not anticipating we'll go over, but I feel like that's one of those things where if you front load it, you manage expectations a little bit. Ladies, thank you so much. We'll make sure you're good and that you're ready to go before we start any timers or anything like that.
Good. That'd be great.
Yeah.
We might have to read really fast.
And before we start the timer, if you wouldn't mind, for those people who are here who maybe don't know, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, and then we'll start.
3 minutes. Go ahead.
Got a 3 second.
Yeah, I'm Colette Walker.
I'm Denise Boutin. And I'm Shelley Byrne.
That was in our introductions. So thank you, Chair, for having us here today to present the Committee of the Whole. We are a group of citizens that have come together over a common concern: the proposed rerouting of Pathway to the Park. Some of us were consulted, most of us were not. Therefore, none of us really know the full story. On November the 12th, we held a meeting with 31 citizens from Aspen Heights and the surrounding areas to share information and the past history since the inception of the Pathway to the Park. From that meeting, we gathered concerns from those in attendance, including phone calls and emails from those that were unable to attend. And we were asked to put together a presentation on everyone's behalf to you, Town Council. Why we oppose to the spending: less than 2 kilometers of the 26-kilometer trail will actually be within the Hinton town limits. Why is Hinton taxpayers' money being considered in the 2025 budget for such a small percentage of the trail ownership? How will the maintenance of the said trail within the town be maintained, and at whose cost? Forestry and Parks have indicated their condition that this group needs to consult with stakeholders. Consultation was minimal. Most people affected were not contacted, including myself. Is there a conflict of interest with one of our councillors sitting on the Pathway to the Park board? Did this councillor have an opportunity to remove himself from any past or future funding releases? Will the town of Hinton have to pay for some of the highway improvements since they are in support of this project? It appears that there are more critical and immediate needs within our community that need 2025 budgeted money to be spent within the town of Hinton, residents and Hinton businesses. In the Pathway to the Park presentation on October 8th, Garth Griffiths says, and I quote, "We don't really need the money right now, but we are asking you to keep it in the budget for us." And are there not any services or clubs within Hinton that will need this money right away?
I'd like to speak to the approaches and the crossings that will occur along this pathway, really the first 6 kilometers of it. The trails leaving Hinton will cross 3 gravel roads. These are approaches that are on Highway 16 with absolutely no turning lanes at all. Vehicles are traveling at 100 kilometers an hour, needing to reduce their speed, and will be turning off, watching the traffic from behind them, and also whether there are pedestrians beside them. It appears that the pathway users will connect to the rest of the path at the Highway 40 and Highway 16 intersection. It looks at this point that they will need to cross the Highway 40 area right at that juncture of Highway 16. This is not going to be favorable to the traffic. It will slow it down, and it is probably the most dangerous crossing out there for pedestrians and cyclists. If your excursion is lucky enough to start at the Aspen Heights parking lot or the proposed one, your approach to this area will be a left turning lane off of Highway 40 where the speeds are 100 kilometers an hour. The narrow shoulders are very small and the ditches are very deep. We've had many rear end collisions over the years in this exact location. Included in our package we sent was a traffic impact study that they did on the Aspenites Road in 2002. I know it's old, but it has some very good points. We do have a poor sight line due to a 350-meter radius curve that our road is built on. If there was to be any future development, there would have to be, or increase in traffic, there would need to be a turning lane placed here. And the reduction of speed down to 80 kilometers an hour. It is currently at 100. We know Alberta Transportation will do a great job with all these approaches. But since we drive these many times a day, we thought we would share our concerns and knowledge in hopes that the intersections will be improved. As we use the intersections, who has the right of way? Who is paying attention, and who will make the bad judgment call that day? We are concerned for the safety of the pedestrians and the vehicle users. So up on the screen right now is a letter that Rand McPherson received from Alberta Transportation. We're lost. Okay. In 2009, Rand McPherson wanted to divide his acreage in half. Alberta Transportation told him that the most recent traffic impact assessment found this intersection to be undesirable as it is on a curve. If he proceeded with any additional development or subdividing in this area, so basically increasing traffic at the intersection, he would be responsible for improving the intersection at his own cost. He did not go ahead with his plans, and neither did another family that wanted to subdivide earlier. Okay, the next slide is a letter that was submitted by Deanna Ellis Lalonde. So Deanna has shared the details of her accident from 2018 in order to highlight how dangerous the intersection at Highway 40 North and Aspen Heights Road is. Deanna was rear-ended at this intersection. The vehicle that hit her truck had gained enough speed in the less than 300 meters it had traveled to send her dogs flying into the dash, cause $30,000 damage to her truck, and leave Deanna to endure numerous surgeries and ongoing recovery. Converting the old horse lease or burrow pit into a parking lot. Currently, this location provides grazing area and for the homes and diverse homes for the wildlife. There are many photos included in the next few slides of the parking lot area. Currently, our West End elk herd frequently uses this area as their circling route and is part of their feeding and rutting zone. Will there be environmental impact assessment completed for this area? Will this parking lot be paved? Is there a size limit? Who else will use the parking lot? What happens if other users use it? Will the parking lot become public just for anyone to use? Vehicles often park on the side of the road and catch a lift from Grand Cache to Jasper. Will there be overnight camping? Will other Outback users choose to park in this lot and unload?
Thanks. Paving the trails already exist in their natural form, so why do we have to pave them? Tourists and locals currently use these trails in a variety of activities and are very respectful to each other. Why is there a need to change this? This area falls under the Wildlife Management Area 438. There's year-round hunting for small game. Bow hunting begins late August and rifle season begins mid-September, ends at the end of November. Will this potential increase in potentially 50,000 users, we're told, be of any safety concern? Will hunting be prohibited in the future? There are 3 active trap lines that will directly be impacted by this plan. None of these trappers have been consulted to date. If and when the path is completed, it will then be turned over to the Crown as their protected asset. This could potentially remove the multi-use rights we currently have and are using in this area. In order to create a paved 3-meter wide trail through this diverse green zone, logging is going to have to take place. This will affect the forest itself, the flora, the fauna, the habitat for wildlife, and the groundwaters along the way.
So this letter was submitted to us from Calvin Beauchamp, and he had asked me to read the letter, but I will just summarize a few key points. So Calvin Beauchamp is an Indigenous leaseholder of registered trapline 2039. Calvin was not contacted by Alberta Parks during their consultation period, nor was he contacted by anyone from the pathway to the park. Calvin's trapline has been active for generations, and he depends on it for his livelihood. In Calvin's words, "My trapline will be dissected and destroyed if the routing of the pathway of the park stays as it is."
We do have environmental concerns with the use of the asphalt in this area, crude oil leaching into smaller trickles of water, leaching into the soils and affecting the animal habitat among them. We're curious whether it has to be surfaced. And like Colette said, that is the concern for us. You can see where the sharing of the trails exists currently. These are horseback riders, motocrossers, cyclists, waters, horseback, we've got snowshoeing, cyclists, and ATVs. This area is used with many, many trails.
Okay, forest fire risk. July 22nd, the evacuation notice came for Jasper National Park and Jasper Town Site. We were horrified by the picture of the fireball looming over the Jasper Gatehouse. Forest fire danger is real. There is lots of undergrowth to act as fuel, and there is always wind, a disastrous combination for any forested area. Add the thousands of projected visitors to these proposed trails. One errant cigarette butt or a poorly managed campfire could lead to catastrophic wildfire. As stated on the Alberta Wildfire website, 67% of all forest fires are human caused. Okay, so next we're talking about the, oh no.
We have just a little bit left. May we, Council?
Council, if it's the will of council, I would accept a motion to extend the delegation portion. Councillor Taylor. Mr. Mayor, sorry, folks. One moment. Mr. Mayor, clearly I'm not using this thing right. If you wouldn't mind, there, okay, there we go. We're good.
Yeah, I move that you put the rules aside so this delegation can continue, please, for a few more minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, any discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll just wait administration if we can get that motion up. My apologies, ladies. We just have to make sure we vote on it and then we'll be good. Motion extended. Council, have a motion to extend the delegation. Any discussion? Seeing none, then we'll call the question. Council, if you can vote electronically now, please. And that is carried unanimously. My apologies, ladies. If you would, please continue.
Thank you very much. The trail management and safety. Respectful users of these trails pack out their own garbage. If garbage cans and outhouses are placed along the trails, they will be used, and this will attract dangerous wildlife and require constant maintenance. There cannot be any overflowing garbage cans on the trails or in the parking lots. A bear can smell an apple core from 400 meters away. The original marketing of the pathway to the park states the trail is family-friendly and suitable for all users. Some of the locations on the proposed trails are very remote and steep. Anyone with mobility issues may struggle. Many individuals and families have said that they wouldn't feel safe using the proposed trails, myself included. We are concerned that the West Yellowhead Trail Society plans to fundraise each year in order to maintain these trails. What happens when the West Yellowhead Trail Society is unable to fundraise the money? The ongoing patrol of these trails at regular intervals to ensure cleanliness, user safety, the removal of garbage and fallen trees, and the monitoring of random camping along the trail is essential.
Some of the other concerns and food for thought, the building of the bridge over Muscuda Creek. We all know that these waters flood annually, with the last year being the worst that I've ever seen. Has the Department of Fisheries and Oceans been contacted? There are fish in that creek. Will they grant permission to build a bridge over it? And at what additional cost and to whom? Have council and Pathway to the Park planners considered the 5 roadway crossings that have narrow and no turning lanes? These crossings may require improvements and traffic assessments as per conditions that are set out by Alberta Parks. The trail is already being used by tourists and locals in many capacities. Do we really need to spend taxpayers' money paving a trail through a green zone that's already being utilized? Pathway to the Park has not been forthcoming nor transparent with stakeholders. Therefore, the routing remains unclear as to where it's really going. Reviewing the Pathway to the Park website is still indicating the original routing. This is misleading information. Which route was approved by the trail management plan? Outdated and misleading promo information is being shared at the Hinton Theatre prior to Move Me commencement. Should they be misleading the public? Yellowhead County Mayor Wade Williams has stated in a letter dated November the 23rd of 2024, and I quote him, "I have never said that the county opposes the trail, but at this time the county does not support it. This trail was added to our master plan so that in the future, if it does align with Yellowhead County's plan, it would then be open for discussion. I know nothing about them," and he was referring to Pathway to the Park, "stopping this trail at Kinky Lake and Yellowhead County's request."
And then we have a letter here from Gina Antaleski from Alberta Parks, and she was responding to me to a letter I had sent asking about who was responsible about the traffic impact assessment. So in this letter, it was a surprise to find out that a trail management plan had been approved in October. The residents of Aspen Heights were under the impression that the consultation process was ongoing. We were waiting for Alberta Parks to set up an information meeting, which was requested 3 times. This letter arrived November 18th. This letter points out that there is still lots of work for Pathway to the Park to complete before the development can move forward, including a new traffic impact assessment at Highway 40 North and Aspen Road. The traffic impact assessment will outline the required improvements. And she quotes here, "It is the responsibility of the developer or the county, depending on the situation, to carry out the improvements in a timely manner and bearing the cost before the development can move forward." Sorry. Double duty.
These are just some of the pictures from the approach. These are pictures from around the area and approachways. We just thought maybe.
And I just want to point out, looking at some of those roadways, that the current turnoff, which is not an official turnoff, is actually less than 2 meters in width. So in closing, thank you, Chair, Mayor, and councillors for giving us this opportunity. We hope to have shared enough information as to why so many citizens have concerns regarding this pathway to the park. Please consider all of these finalizing your 2025 Hinton Town budget, and consider denying the funding request for the year 2025 and the year 2026. We are available for any questions should council have.
Perfect. Ladies, before you go, I will open it up to council to see if there are any questions that they have. Council? I have Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Race. Oh, and Councillor Taylor.
It's not a question. It's addressing the perceived conflict of interest, if you would allow me.
Please.
Thanks. At this point, I feel the need to address the comment from your presentation of the perceived conflict of interest with council on the pathway to the park. My part. There's no secret in my private time I've been involved with the pathway to the park as a volunteer and a member of the board. I mean, it'd be that presentations you've seen me there, you know, public fairs. I consider it a good project that will benefit Hinton, and it seems a logical advancement of our biking infrastructure and community. But I've received no remuneration, so my involvement's not a pecuniary conflict under Section 170 of the Municipal Governance Act, which, in my knowledge, is the only condition under which I can recuse myself from participating on council. So no financial involvement. I'm a great believer in volunteering, including thinking that every citizen who's had a successful career in this town should try to give back to the community in some way by donating money to various causes or by donating time. I've done both for this community. In fact, the pathway to the park is just one of my many volunteer activities. So when I show up to council, I represent all citizens. I try to make the best decisions in the interests of town, like every councillor who's on a board or in any way involved in giving back to Hinton. Are we to believe that council only people who have no involvement in the life of the community, or insist that they quit volunteer activity as soon as they join council? I don't think we want that. On the contrary, I would encourage every citizen to get involved and volunteer for projects and activities that they think will better the town. And I'm proud of it. And I have nothing to hide with regard to the pathway or any of my other activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In previous conversation with some people in your group, you had mentioned the caribou or elk. So is this a caribou migration area, or how would it impact them?
I'm not sure. The only thing that I was referencing earlier today was the elk that circle in from the golf course into our acreage on this side and Lynn Lord's and go right through that parking lot area. There's a lot of elk that make that area their home.
Okay. And just one more thing.
Please.
I know Councillor Taylor does not need me to speak for him, but I do have to say, if there's any councillor here that always wants to reduce the amount of money we give to anybody, it's him. And I'm saying that in a good way. Twice he has reduced the amount of monies that the pathway to the park has requested. It's all starts with him. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, any other questions or comments? Then just in wrapping up, first of all, you know what, everybody, thank you for coming out. Thanks for expressing your concerns in a respectful way. I think these gatherings are important to what makes democracy great. Thank you for taking your time to present your thoughts so rationally and completely to council. Again, if you didn't have a chance to speak, but you would like to share those thoughts and concerns with council, you can email all of council@hinton.ca. That's the way to get the email to all of us. There's also other forms of contact information on the council webpage. Please feel free to take advantage of those. So thank you again for your time this evening. We'll give everybody actually I think right now what we'll do is we'll call a brief 2-minute recess to give you a chance to leave if that's your desire. And then that'll give our admin time to set up for our next delegation. Ladies, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, and we will call the meeting back to order at 4:46 p.m. Again, thank you everyone for the smooth transition that came before this. we will move on to our second delegation of the evening, identified as item 4.2 on the agenda, the CUTRIC's Alberta Municipalities and ZEB feasibility project update. And we would like to welcome our delegation from CUTRIC's to our meeting this afternoon, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And we really want to appreciate the time that you've allowed us here today. So thank you from our team to the entire committee of the whole today. My name is Josipa Petrinic, and I'm the CEO and president of the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. And I've got a couple of my colleagues on the line with me today, Alexis Dunphy, who will be co-presenting, who joins you along with myself from Ontario today. And we have our colleague Bernard Ross, who is also joining, and Ryan Weffel. Although having said that, I'm born and raised Albertan, and 30% of our team is in Alberta and Calgary and Edmonton. So we're spending a lot of time doing a number of the decarbonization studies across Alberta today. So what we're going to be presenting in the very short period of time that we have, and I apologize in advance for the fire hosing that might ensue, we'll try and be as swift as possible, knowing that we're going to come back with a little bit more of a deep dive in a couple months' time when this is all finalized. But what we're going to be presenting today is some of the preliminary results. I first want to start off before we get into the preliminary results of the decarbonization study for transit in the town of Hinton by acknowledging that here where I'm joining you from St. Catharines, we do stand on the land of the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples. And that CUTRIC is a women-led nonprofit in technology innovation. We have a gender and racial parity policy, and we support investigations and research into missing and murdered women as part of our research orientation. So with that, we'd like to move first just to walk you through some of the core elements here that we're going to be presenting. We're going to go through a high-level overview of the study summary that we've done for the town of Hinton and the transit service, some of the initial modeling results, looking at the fixed service, the on-demand modeling, fleet timelines, and then the core focus today is the update around the environmental life cycle analysis, which basically tells you, is decarbonization of transit through battery electrification or hydrogen fuel cell electrification going to be cleaner or cheaper? In the most of the country, given that we've done dozens of studies across the country now as part of the Zero Emissions Transit Fund federally, which the federal government has co-sponsored and funded substantially over the last few years, it does make sense. There's a decarbonization agenda where over time and over generations, it's cheaper and cleaner. But a lot of the country has a green grid. In Alberta, in Saskatchewan, and in the territories, it's a very different story. And so we're going to walk you through that today. And it almost entirely stems from the nature of the electrical grid that the vehicles are pulling from. So to first start off with just going through a study summary, we'll note again that these are the preliminary outcomes of the research, and that the conclusions may still change with the final results being submitted a little bit later on by the end of January in 2025. And so we would ask that the results be taken as guidelines only right now, but we're very happy to answer any questions you may have. And just to set it within context, this is part of a larger study, a group of agencies all together. So if we move forward one slide, I'll just walk you through the Hinton study as part of a collaboration between CUTRIC, our nonprofit technical organization, the federal funding through the Zero Emissions Transit Fund, the town of Hinton, and a list of 9 agencies in total, of which Hinton is one. So some of the partners in this grouping include Airdrie, Banff, and Bow Valley, Fort Saskatchewan, Leduc, Rocky View, Spruce Grove, Strathcona County, and Whitecourt. And this was all initiated in partnership with Fortis Alberta, which reached out to flag to us that they were concerned that they didn't necessarily know what the future load on the grid might look like if all agencies were to decarbonize through battery electrification. And that was really starting to take off, in particular in Alberta, with, of course, Edmonton's massive decarbonization effort through battery electrification, and also through Calgary's initial pilots and deployments of battery electrification. Those are very, very large loads on the grid. But the question is, for the smaller towns and municipalities around, what would that load look like if it started to hit the grid, given that federal money was almost entirely targeting battery electrification or hydrogen fuel cell electrification? So that's where this comes from. And so therefore, happily for the town of Hinton, it's a lot of technical research that the feds and a partner in Fortis Alberta have paid for. So that's quite helpful. In other cities, the transit agency typically covers about 20% of the cost of the research. So there's an opportunity here for a lot of learnings without necessarily the financial risk of having to carry the cost of the full study. So with that, we're going to walk now into some of the outline of what we looked at in this study, which is really an assessment of what does decarbonization look like in the town of Hinton with your current fleet. We looked at your fixed service, which is the 2 30-foot gasoline buses. We took a look at your on-demand service, which typically across Canada is a really great way to save on emissions and drive up ridership is on demand, regardless of whether it's battery or otherwise. So we looked at your 1 30-foot gasoline bus service that is used for that. And so then the service overall includes the 1 fixed route block per day and the 1 on-demand bus. And so running that service through a decarbonization schedule and decarbonization technologies results in the outcomes that we're going to present to you today. And so with that, we'll walk you through here just in terms of the pathway. We start by working with your colleagues on the transit side. They've been fantastic in providing a lot of data, and we do really want to thank them because we ask for a lot of data, and we know we're a bit data nerdy in that sense, but the better the data, the better the prediction, the more realistic it is. So we want to really thank you for providing a lot of that data. We then run that through an energy analysis where we use the specifications of the vehicles that are on the market today. So if the town of Hinton wanted to buy these battery electric buses or hydrogen buses tomorrow, based on what manufacturers actually provide today, we incorporate those specifications, run your system through it. Then we show what happens. Do the buses run out of power? Do they have enough energy? What's the cost of it all? And how polluting or clean are they? And then we look at where it's easiest for you to start electrification, in particular, if you have a larger fleet or if you have a smaller fleet, where it makes more sense. And then we end up in the final report to the town. So we're going to walk you through those preliminary results right now through the modeling summary. And with that, I'll turn to my colleague, Alexis Dunphy, who's going to walk you through the next sections.
Hello, folks. I'm very excited to be speaking to the town of Hinton, and I'll go through as fast as I can some of the results of our study, but bearing in mind we will be back to speak to you again, and we'll also be presenting dissemination campaign materials that will allow you to review this in more detail. On the whole, across Canada, for transit agencies, there's 3 scenarios to consider for electrification. You can either go with scenario 1, full battery electric solution, where you transition all buses to a battery electric bus. You can approach it with scenario 2, full fuel cell electric bus or FCEB solution, which is transitioning all your buses to hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. Or a solution for some larger agencies is a mixed green fleet of both battery electric and FCEB buses. However, for the size of Hinton, that wasn't appropriate due to the complexity and cost, so we removed that option. This is a breakdown of CUTRIC's Food Eye tool. I won't go into too much detail because we touch more of these as we go through. For our modeling summary, we will look at 3 different duty cycles to understand the different scenarios your bus can be working under. With light duty cycle, you have only the driver making only mandatory stops such as stop signs. And with medium duty cycle, it's your average load and average stop frequency, both for bus stops and as well as traffic lights. With heavy duty, we're assuming the bus is completely full, with stopping at every single stop sign, every single pedestrian crossbreak, and every single stop. For this analysis for the fixed route, we used Hinton's ridership data, and for the on-demand service, we used the bus capacity. For heater types, these are specific to battery electric buses. You can approach battery electric buses with 2 different heater types. You can either use heater type 1, electric, which draws its energy to heat the cabin from the battery itself, or the heater type 2, which is an auxiliary diesel heater, in addition to the battery, which uses the diesel heating to heat the cabin. We'll go through in detail the differences between them. This is not appropriate associated with FCEBs, as they use the auxiliary heat from the hydrogen. For the fixed model services, we looked at 3 different buses for battery electric, ranging in size from 30 foot to 40 foot, with battery capacities from 350 to 550. And for the FCEB, we looked at 1 FCEB, which is 40 foot with a 35 kilogram hydrogen. We looked at 3 different manufacturers, and these are all buses currently available in Canada.
And Alexis, sorry, just
Yeah.
as one note, we might want to just clarify, since not everybody might know what those buses look like. So if you just go back that one slide, just to note here that when we talk about a bus with 350 kilowatt hour capacity, just to put it in perspective, if anybody ever bought a Nissan electric car, that has between 20, 30 kilowatt hours. So you're talking about a bus with about 10 times the size of an electric car battery pack. If somebody is rich enough to buy a souped up Tesla, you're talking about something in that 60, 70, 80 kilowatt hour zone, if not higher. So still these buses are 3 to 4 times as big as a Tesla battery pack. So they're quite large vehicles with very large battery packs involved in terms of the energy capacity. Over to you, Alexis.
So I'm going to go through some of the results very quickly. So to put this in perspective, for BEB1 in the heavy duty cycle, your range is around 160 kilometers. But then if you add the heater type 2, which is the diesel one, it actually increases the range by 25% to 200 kilometers. Looking at the FCEB, specifically here, we can see the FCEB across the different duty cycles. To put this in perspective, the heavy duty cycle, which is what we model, is around 340 kilometers of range. Looking here at the two different graphs, which show the bad block energy consumption, for each graph along the y-axis is the energy in kilowatt hours, and along the y-axis is the service day block for Saturday versus weekend, with blue showing the total medium duty cycle energy and orange the total energy for the heavy duty cycle. The black line there shows the capacity threshold, which is set at returning to the depot with 20% of your battery capacity still remaining, which is what we use as a success criteria based on manufacturer specifications. So as you can see, comparing the heater type 1 electric to heater type 2 diesel, there's a higher success rate with the diesel heater, with only a slight for the heavy duty in the weekday having some unsuccessful.
And perhaps Alexis will just add there that if the vehicle goes over the black line, what it means is it's running out of power before it comes back to the depot. So it's just running out of battery pack and the bus will stop essentially. So what we're looking at is trying to get the vehicles to be under that line so that they're coming back to depot with some power left, or some energy left rather, in the battery pack.
So looking at the FCEB1, which is the one we modeled, you'll see along the y-axis, it's now showing the hydrogen fuel in kilograms, and along the x-axis, it is again service day block, Saturday versus weekday, with blue being medium and orange being heavy duty. Here, we're showing the capacity threshold based on the usable hydrogen in the tank. Again, this is as if you were returning to depot without any hydrogen remaining in the tank. As shown here, you would be successful in every scenario. Summarizing these results, we're all looking at infrastructure. For scenario 1, full BEB solution with heater type 1 electric in the medium duty, you're having all the 2 blocks successful with depot charging and a low power charger. However, once you move into the heavy duty for the electric heater, you're having to block split, which is where 2 BEBs are running the service of what was previously done with 1 gasoline bus, which increases your fleet size. For scenario 1, full BEB solution with heater type 2, you're seeing that in both medium and heavy, it's successful with depot charging. As in the heavy duty cycle, remember there was the slight unsuccessful. In this scenario, you have a high powered charger where the bus is able to go back to depot and top up its battery to continue its route. For scenario 2, full FCEB solution, in both medium and heavy duty, you're having 2 blocks successful with depot refueling and the requirement of depot hydrogen station and pump. For our modeling purposes, we looked at heavy duty cycle, so you know what your worst case scenario is. For on-demand modeling, we looked at 1 BEB for both scenario 1, full BEB solution, and scenario 2, full FCEB solution. This is because currently on the Canadian market, there's no small FCEBs, so below 40, the 40-foot range. So for your on-demand service, regardless of scenario, we're moving forward with a BEB. In these statistics, understanding that for the on-demand, there's a lot of non-revenue distances. which means that you're only having the bus driver, reducing your load on the system and allowing the small battery capacity to still be successful in both hypothetical blocks for medium and heavy. With heater type 1, you're getting around 70 kilometers, and heater type 2, you're getting about 128 kilometers. So still successfully under the average daily mileage. Moving quickly through the fleet timelines, we can see that for the fixed service, for your current fleet, you would maintain the same fleet size over the timeline. Meanwhile, for scenario 1 with heater type 1, you're going to need that extra bus for that block splitting, but low powered chargers. For scenario 1 with the heater type 2, you're having a 1-to-1 replacement, but requiring that high powered depot charger. For scenario 2, you're again 1-to-1 replacement ratio with a hydrogen station and 1 low powered charger for the BEV. For the environmental life cycle analysis, we're looking at the life cycle emissions. So this moves beyond the operational GHG emissions, which is just the fuel production and BOS operations, and instead looking at the full life cycle with manufacturing, shipping, facility operations, and more. This is showing your fixed route service with along the y-axis, the global warming potential in tons of CO2, and along the x-axis, you can see the different scenarios broken down by, for scenario 1, the different heater types, and for scenario 2, the different methods of making hydrogen. With grid hydrogen, using electricity from Alberta's grid, gray hydrogen using steam methane reformation, and the theoretical blue hydrogen, which uses steam methane reformation with carbon capture. You can see here the high emissions associated with Alberta's grid, but as Alberta continues to move towards a greener grid, these emissions would be reduced.
And here, perhaps Alexis will just take 1 minute just to flag again on the left-hand side. You can see the gasoline base case, which is currently your fleet. It's hitting just over that 3,000 mark in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent. If you scroll to the right, the hydrogen buses, which technically in other grid systems where the grid is composed of hydro or nuclear, would have a lower emissions profile. In Alberta, it has a higher emissions profile because there is natural gas and because there are fossil fuels on the electrical grid. But per Alexis's point, as the province is decarbonizing fairly rapidly on the grid system, that emissions profile would come down over time. In the battery electric scenario, you could see that even with the grid profile having fossil fuels on it, the battery electric scenarios there are still cleaner than the gasoline base case. So that does put in perspective, it is quite unique to Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the territories where the grid does not have as heavy reliance on renewables. It's still an emissions winner on battery electrification, not necessarily an emissions winner on hydrogen drawn from the grid today, but could be in the future if the grid were to decarbonize. Over to you, Alexis.
I'm aware we're basically at time, so I'll roll through the rest of our slides. So looking at the same analysis for the on-demand, you'll see again the global warming potential in tons of CO2, and then the scenario breakdown between the 2 different heater types. As you can see, it's a substantial reduction between the 2 buses, between the different scenarios. Moving on to a breakdown between scenario 1, BEB solution, and scenario 2, FCEB solution, you'll see that heater type 1 has 21% reduction, but heater type 2 actually has more reduction despite the fact it has the emissions associated with the auxiliary diesel heater. That is because the diesel heater is very efficient compared to a diesel engine, and also it has that entire less bus. So adding the extra bus required for heater type 1 electrification removes a lot of the emissions. Then for scenario 2, for FCEB solution, you're seeing, as we said, a 30% increase if you're using grid hydrogen, and then a potential 50% reduction if you have the theoretical blue hydrogen, and an approximately 30% reduction if you have gray hydrogen.
And maybe Alexis, knowing we are at time, but I do want to make sure that that piece is clear because it does come across a little bit surprising to people. On the left-hand side, when we use the electric heater, with a lot of agencies wanted no diesel emissions whatsoever, use an electric heater. But as Alexis noted, the electric heater draws down on your battery pack. So when the heater is turned on, then you have less range on the vehicle. The vehicle has less range. It runs out of power in the middle of the route. So you now need 2 buses compared to 1. Those 2 buses, by the time you add up their manufacturing and their shipping and their delivery, delivery add up to more pollution than just one electric bus with a diesel heater. So that's what the life cycle emissions profile takes into account. On bus by bus, the battery electric bus with an electric heater is cleaner, but because you need two of them compared to one, it becomes dirtier. And that's a fleet emissions profile that often gets missed when folks look at fleet electrification. So just making sure that that's all clear. Over to you, Alexis.
Perfect. And moving on to our conclusions. Again, these are preliminary conclusions. CUTRIC will be back to present the final conclusions along with the economic analysis and facilities assessment. But at this stage, looking at the base case compared with scenario 1, BEB solution with heater type 1, scenario 1 full BEB solution with heater type 2, and scenario 2 full FCEB solution, you'll see the difference in the life cycle emissions. Looking specifically when we're using grid hydrogen, you can see that the emissions actually increase with FCEBs and has the greatest reduction with the diesel heaters. Again, your fleet size will grow with that scenario 1 using electric heaters, but have a 1-to-1 replacement with the other 2 electrification scenarios. Then with the infrastructure required, it is 2 low-powered chargers for scenario 1, 1 high-powered charger and 1 low-powered charger for heater type 2, and then finally 1 hydrogen station and pump with 1 low-powered charger for scenario 2. Thank you so much for your time. I will pass that back over to Josipa.
Thank you so much. We want to thank you again. We know we fire hosed you. We tried to squish it into 10 minutes, a lot of work, but we are very open to questions and we're looking forward to coming back with the final results in a couple months' time. Thank you very much, and to the chair.
Great, thank you very much. Council, questions? Councilor Taylor.
Well, thank you for your report. I've been given information from administration that says the following. I wonder if you could comment on it. Hybrid and electric vehicles are approximately 50% more expensive than regular vehicles, harder to get parts, and charging stations can be problematic. Refer to November 22nd, 2024 CUTRIC presentation. Is that a fair assessment?
Sorry, through the chair, could I ask for it to be repeated? I didn't hear the first part. Was it hybrid electric vehicles?
Hybrid and electric vehicles are approximately 50% more expensive than regular vehicles, harder to get parts, and charging stations can be problematic. Refer to November 22nd, 2024 CUTRIC presentation.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my words, what I have received.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Well, let's through the chair, if I may answer those. So there's 3 parts. One is that the buses themselves could be more expensive. That is true. The diesel vehicles or gasoline vehicles, typically, as an example, I'll give you an apples to apples, let's say a 40-footer in the marketplace today. A 40-foot diesel vehicle, depending on your specifications, is somewhere in that $600,000 to $700,000 zone. A battery electric bus is definitely over $1 million today, about 1.2, 1.1. And a hydrogen fuel cell bus, absolutely, it's about 1.7, 1.8 million. So they're definitely more expensive on an upfront basis. Most agencies then look at how much gasoline or diesel it saves them over time. Depending on the agency, that upfront cost gets paid off over the course of a generation, over the course of 15 years, over the course of 12 years, depending on usage and the system. In the case of Hinton, today we haven't gone through the detailed deep dive of the economics, but in the final assessment, when we come back, we'll walk you through whether you get a payoff period in the life cycle of the vehicles. So that analysis is underway. So that is true. The buses up front are more expensive, and depending on the usage and the use case profile, they either pay themselves off or they don't. And that's part of that economic piece. The second piece about parts, that also depends. Definitely the original concept, and still today, it is true that there are fewer moving parts on electrified vehicles, including on buses. So in theory, there should be less maintenance, and in theory, there should be fewer parts replacement. However, in practice, the pandemic certainly taught us that part supply is difficult. It is heavily globalized. And so when something does go wrong, obtaining those parts can be extremely difficult. And increasingly now, many agencies are looking at having to house some of the specialized electrified parts in their own depots or nearby. And so that's some of the newer procurement standards, is making sure manufacturers have some of those specific, unique parts for the electrified vehicles in their facilities in Canada for on-demand delivery. So that is certainly true. And then chargers, can they be problematic? Like any infrastructure, especially if it's stored outside. The argument right now, if you look at the warranty conditions for outdoor high-power charging systems, is they should last about 15 years and have a relatively low amount of maintenance because they do come from rail technology. Those pantograph systems have been established over many, many years. However, in practice, we have run a pan-Canadian electric bus project for several years now in Brampton, York Region, and TransLink in Vancouver. And even in the balmy conditions of Vancouver, the pantographs can have issues and the chargers can have problems with them. So there's certainly new technology. There's certainly some challenges with those new technologies, and the manufacturers are being asked to deliver a lot more maintenance support in the initial procurements these days. So I would say overall, yes, the buses up front are more expensive. Depending on usage, they get paid off or they don't get paid off. The parts have become a matter of importance in terms of storage of those specialized parts and training of staff to know how to manage those parts. And the charging systems can be challenging, certainly. So all in all, it's new technology that comes with the headaches of new technology. On the flip side, diesel and gasoline vehicles have high failure rates in many conditions. Often we have found in the comparison-based cases that transit agencies are reporting more failure than the manufacturer had predicted upon delivery, even for hybrids that should operate a lot better than full diesel or gasolines. So I think in comparison, the jury's out on which ones necessarily require more maintenance. I think we're going to need a few more years of experience to know whether the promises actually pan out in terms of less maintenance over time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Haas, then Ostash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious on the lifespan of the battery pack, because when you were saying the comparison between a car and a bus, and so what are the lifespan of those batteries? And then following that up, what's the replacement costs of that? And then the third is in our winter months, I don't know what the technology is like, but I mean, I know when I go outside in my phone, it drags the battery down to dead. So in the cold,
sure.
So I just, what are the impacts on those battery packs for winter months?
Thank you very much for the question through the chair. I'll speak to the battery life cycle to start with, and noting that the car world is very different from the transit world. And I know it's easy to assume that the car world is going to translate. To the credit of the bus manufacturers, and there's not that many of them, like it's a very, very, very small market. There's only really 2 large manufacturers of buses in Canada, with a smattering of other smaller manufacturers of smaller footage, so the 20-footers and 30-footers. To their credit, they've really designed battery management systems that are meant to thermally protect the battery pack. And I would suggest much more so than the car industry has done. And that's because they're larger vehicles that have much more rugged usage patterns. Having said that, the batteries do degrade. There is no doubt. That's just the laws of physics and the laws of chemistry. So right now, depending on the manufacturer and the size of the battery pack, typically what we're seeing and what we're modeling is between 7 and 12 years, you have to refurbish the battery. And what that means is, again, depending on the chemistry of the battery pack, and different manufacturers have different chemistries, depending on the usage, and then more importantly, depending on the charge profile. So if you have high power chargers versus low power chargers, the high power chargers will degrade the battery faster. You will need to replace those batteries anywhere between 7 and 12 years. And then sometimes the manufacturer actually has a set warranty. There are some bus manufacturers that say it has to be at 7, and others that say you will get up to 12. And what that means is at that 7 to 12 year period, your battery is degraded to about 80% of its usable capacity. Sometimes the warranty says 75. So it's not that it can't be used, it's that the range is dropping off about 25% on the start of the day. So that's typically the replacement schedule. Now, in the diesel or gasoline world, we often see a refurbishment at the 10 to 12 year life cycle. So a lot of transit agencies will own their buses for say 20 years or 18 years and very typically refurbish the engine entirely at the 10 or 12 year mark. And it can be in the same zone of cost, depending again on the size of battery, but the battery replacement can also be a lot more expensive. So for example, you'll see in the automotive world that some automotive manufacturers will get something like $130 to $200 per kilowatt hour American. In the bus world, it's not that cheap. I wish it were, but the bus world has much lower volumes. And so we typically are seeing between $300 and $1,000 per kilowatt hour for replacement. So you can imagine if you have a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack and it's $1,000 per kilowatt hour, it's $100,000 to replace that battery pack. Now, in your cases, the vehicles that we modeled are in that 300 to 400 kilowatt hour zone. The bus manufacturers in that zone are likely getting somewhere between $500 to $700 per kilowatt hour for replacement because it's lower volume. So you are looking at a couple $100,000 to replace that battery pack, which is why the application is so important. Running those vehicles through the TTC in Toronto or TransLink in Vancouver or Calgary Transit or Edmonton Transit, where they're being used 20 hours a day and the bus is full with crush capacity, that makes a lot of sense because you're paying it off. In the town of Hinton, where your duty cycles are much less, your ridership is much less, and it's not as rugged, it's probably not going to make economic sense. So those are the two questions that you had posed there. The third one was about winter conditions. In the modeling that Alexis reviewed, you'll note that we reference heavy duty. As she noted, heavy duty includes the bus comes out of the depot, makes every stop, every crosswalk is a stop, every light is assumed to be red light, and the bus is full of people. But the other thing the heavy duty cycle assumes is winter conditions or extreme summer. So the HVAC is turned on. And so in that heavy duty cycle, it is the worst case scenario, which is why Alexis went through what happens if it's the worst case scenario with an electric heater. Your bus will run out of power because the HVAC draws down. Unlike in the car world, where you have your electric car or your phone, as you noted, it gets cold. And so the battery pack itself reduces capacity right away. And if you have an electric car, you'll know you drop 30% to 40% of your range right away because the battery itself is cold. In the bus world, it's not so much the coldness of the battery pack because those thermal management systems are kind of putting a blanket around the battery pack. That's not the big worry. The big worry is that when the doors on the bus open and close, all the hot air escapes and the HVAC ramps right back up. And when the HVAC ramps up, that's basically drawing down the battery to heat ambient air to make the driver and the passengers warm. So in the bus and in the large vehicle world, it's actually the HVAC situation that draws down the battery pack. You do see 30 to 40% range reduction as a result of that. And that's why in the heavy duty mode, if you are operating in heavy duty mode, you need more vehicles to replace your current gasolines. Now, having said that, I would be, scientifically incorrect if I didn't flag that a lot of transit agencies don't operate in heavy duty mode 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, unless your bus is always packed and people are packed like sardines and your HVAC is always on and every traffic light is a red light and every bus stop has a stop. If that's not happening, then you're probably operating closer to the medium duty load, which means even with those conditions, your bus will still have enough energy.
If I can get back in the queue, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Ostash.
Mr. Chair, the conclusion section, I just need a little bit of help understanding the greenhouse gas emission reduction numbers. Base case scenario 0%, obviously, understand that. Scenario 1, the 21% reduction. Scenario 1 with the diesel heaters is 39% reduction, and then scenario 2 with the fuel cell equipped bus at an increase of 30%. Can you walk me through how that works?
Sure, absolutely, yes. And through the chair, we'll just go to perhaps the conclusion slide. It might be a little bit easier to interpret, Alexis. Yep, there we go. Thank you very much through the chair. And yes, again, we apologize for fire hosing you because normally we take over an hour to walk through the presentation in detail, but we knew we had a fairly tight timeline. So just to walk you through again, your base case scenario right now has the 2 fixed service gasoline buses and the 1 on-demand gasoline bus. And so we're assuming if you continue in that pathway, you're going to continue emitting at the level that you're emitting today. So there wouldn't be any necessary reduction. As an example, if you wanted to continue fossil fuels and you didn't have a gasoline bus, but you had a compressed natural gas vehicle, and instead you pump some renewable natural gas into that pipeline, you would see a reduction from the same gasoline vehicle. So in this case, the base case is assumed to be the 0%. The scenario 1, the first battery electric bus solution, under normal conditions, if you could get away with 1 electric bus with an electric heater, you would see a much better emissions reduction. So here you're seeing about 20% reduction over the gasoline, which makes sense because Alberta's grid has decarbonized. There's less coal on the grid. It's more natural gas. There are large turbines and generators. So when you are running that electricity through a massive system, you get efficiencies of scale. And when you put them into the battery electric bus, even when you include the manufacturing, it's still cleaner than a gasoline vehicle in comparison. However, in this scenario, we're showing you the conclusion under the heavy duty circumstance, assuming winter conditions. And so in that scenario, you need 2 electric buses to replace the 1 gasoline bus. And because of that, you now have 3 battery electric buses to deliver what originally you had is 2 gasoline buses. And because you have to manufacture 3 electric buses and you have to count all of those emissions in manufacturing, delivery, shipment, supply, and you have to count all the electricity used for 3 buses rather than 2, it adds up to more pollution than if it were 2 electric buses with 2 electric heaters. So this would be a better emission story if we looked at the medium duty. We put here the heavy duty. If we look at your medium duty, you can get away with 2 battery electric buses with electric heaters, and then your emission savings goes up. So that's why it's 21% here. We're looking at the heavy duty, worst case scenario, winter conditions. If we then look at scenario 1 with the diesel heater, logic would suggest it's dirtier than the electric heaters, and that is right on a per bus basis. But because the diesel heaters heat the cabin, so when the doors open, there's no drawdown on the battery pack. The HVAC is being run off a small diesel heater. That diesel generator doesn't produce a lot of pollution because it's fairly small. They're relatively efficient as heat systems rather. On that bus itself, it produces just a little bit of emissions, but it does extend the range by about 30%. So it adds 20-30% range to the vehicle in the worst case scenario. And so as a result, you only need 2 electric buses if they have diesel heaters to replace the 2 gasoline buses. So your emissions are better because you only have 2 buses replacing 2 gasoline buses. You only have to count 2 buses pulling from the grid, 2 manufacturing and supply chains in comparison to the previous scenario, which was 3. So that hopefully explains why it goes up in the heavy duty case. But again, in the medium duty case, this would be dirtier than the scenario 1 with electric buses because you'd only have 2 electric buses. In the last scenario, hydrogen fuel cell. Most other places in the country refer to electrolytic hydrogen as green hydrogen, and that's why in the graph it's shown as green. In the case of Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's not that green because the grid has fossil fuel on it. So when you make hydrogen from the grid, which means electrons come off the grid, they bust up a water molecule, you end up with hydrogen and oxygen. That's generally a very low emissions process in the rest of the country, but in the provinces where we still have fossil fuel on the grid, it's an emissions intense process. You're using a fossil fuel grid system to create hydrogen effectively. So you have to take into account the electricity used to produce that hydrogen. And then you have to take into account the production of the hydrogen bus, just like the battery electric buses. But what most people don't know is on a hydrogen bus in Canada, it's actually an electric bus with a hydrogen range extender. In Europe, the hydrogen buses are typically hydrogen fuel cell stacks that push hydrogen right through as electricity, and that electricity powers the motor directly. In Canada, it's not designed like that, largely because of our weather conditions and some efficiency decisions manufacturers made. Instead, the hydrogen goes in a tank The tank feeds a fuel cell stack. That stack converts the hydrogen into electricity. That electricity does not power the motor. It fills a battery pack. It goes into a battery pack, and then that battery pack motor powers the motor. Well, as a result, in the emissions profile for the fuel cell bus, you have to count the manufacturing of a battery pack plus a fuel cell stack plus that bus. And then you have to count the emissions of the hydrogen from the grid, which in this case has fossil fuels going through the vehicle. And when you do convert electricity into hydrogen, then convert hydrogen back into electricity on a bus, you do have inefficiencies along the way. You lose some electrons. So then you also count the emissions with those lost electrons along the way. You add it all up in the Alberta context, and it actually ends up dirtier than gasoline as a direct combustible fuel. Now, this is very specific to jurisdictions where the grid has fossil fuels on it. When we run the same scenario through on routes, say in Quebec or in British Columbia or in Manitoba, it's a green picture because they have hydro and it's hydro on the grid. And so even though you're getting inefficiencies, your electrons are coming off a hydro grid. They're then converting hydrogen, and it truly is green hydrogen. They're being reconverted. So even that production emissions life cycle gets offset by the cleanliness of the grid. So hopefully that explained. I know it can look a little confusing right off the top, but this is why we do say to agencies it's so important that it's specific to your community and your electrical grid.
Great, thank you. Councillor Race, then Councillor Hawes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You know, when we're looking at budgets that cost over $1 million, my question may seem very, very small. What is the warranty on the batteries, and are there any special considerations for disposal of the batteries?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question through the chair. So on the warranties for the batteries in particular, as noted, they're typically in that 7 to 12 zone, a 12-year zone. Depending on the manufacturer, they will insist on somewhere between that 7 and 12-year battery zone, where they will replace or offset the cost if the battery drops below 80% or 75% usable state of charge in that time frame. So it's very precise. And what that means is a lot of the bus manufacturers now impose software controls on the vehicles so that your driver cannot actually deplete the vehicle. Like if you happen to ever drive an electric car or an electric scooter, you'll know that if you're not paying attention, you can drive the battery down to 0 and then you're stranded. In the case of the electric bus, the software typically will stop you from doing that because it will void the warranty in many cases. So the warranty, again, typically between 7 and 12 years. And then at that point, it's on the agency to replace it. And then, sorry, I could not hear the second part of the question. If I could ask just for repetition.
Yeah, sir. So is there any special consideration for disposal of the battery?
Disposal. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. Now I heard. Thank you through the chair. So the disposal of the battery pack is a big issue that we have started to raise at CUTRIC as our generation's nuclear waste problem. There is most certainly an issue brewing. It is a global issue for sure. What happens to the battery packs at the end of the life of the battery pack? Now, Canadian manufacturers have stepped up, and they are starting to offer recycling programs included within the vehicle disposal or the overhaul and the maintenance. And so Canadian manufacturers are stepping up to indicate that the battery and the second life of the battery or the recouping of the battery and all of the metals and minerals within that battery can be reharvested. But I would be lying to you if I suggested that it was a perfect industry. It is not, and it needs a lot of development going forward on the recycling side. I will say that the problem is much bigger in jurisdictions around the world where there are many fewer environmental standards. So in this scenario right now, transit agencies technically own their battery packs at the end of the life. It is possible in theory to repurpose them and say, attach them to your garage and use them as energy storage devices, in theory. And by the laws of science, it's possible. In practice, the battery packs are not manufactured for that purpose. So typically they're being returned or they're being sent back for refurbishment and exchanged. We're just entering into the first generation of vehicles starting to do that. And manufacturers in Canada are starting to develop what their recycling disposal mechanisms would be.
Thank you.
Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, so I have limited experience in this world, but one of the things that I've heard in the larger units the heaviness of the batteries and the load it puts on the vehicle itself. So I'm just curious on the load on our roads, on a, say, a route, infrastructurally, what kind of damage are we looking at with a heavy unit like that? You know, because those are things that we as, you know, have to look at as well in the future, right? So.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, it's the question about the load and the weight. It's absolutely correct. These vehicles are typically heavier, just like an electric car is typically heavier than a gasoline equivalent. Now, there's two things going on. By law, they are supposed to not exceed the road weight standards and regulations. So by law, if you have that heavy battery pack and you have the bus full, the vehicle should not exceed the weight regulations of the road, and that's intended to protect the road. In practice, though, we are all very well aware that there are many instances where the bus does in fact exceed the weight limit and the weight restriction or the weight regulation that is intended for the road network. It is the first and earlier generations of these vehicles right now where that is starting to be monitored. It is an unsolved problem right now in the sense of how much more degradation are the heavier vehicles causing to the road network. It is unstudied, and it's something that does need further analysis. So unfortunately, I don't have a golden answer for you to say we've tracked 20 vehicles and we've assessed the percentage of road degradation. The vehicles are heavier. On the flip side, and this is another element that has not been properly studied simply because the vehicles are new. There's only a few generations. In Canada, there's only just under 300 of them on the road today, and most of them have been deployed in the last 2 to 3 years. So there's not a lot of evidence yet. But on the flip side, we do know that drivers drive better when they drive electric or hydrogen. We know they drive slower, they accelerate slower, they decelerate slower, they tend to engage in rugged behavior or aggressive behavior much less. They tend to not trail other vehicles and hard stop. So we do know the behavior of the vehicle tends to be smoother. And so then the big question is, nobody's done enough research, right? Or really any research to assess how much does better driving offset the heaviness of the vehicle on the road that's meant to be protected for road maintenance. That has to be assessed, and unfortunately, nobody has that answer right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Council, I have no one else in the speaker's queue. One last call. Anything else? Councilor Taylor.
I just want to say thank you very much. Your answers were very clear. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We would like to thank again the Committee of the Whole. We really truly appreciate the opportunity to share our science.
Perfect. Then seeing nothing else, on behalf of council, thanks so much for coming in and spending some time with us today and sharing the report thus far.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And with that, then council and administration, we will move on to section 5 of today's agenda, reports from administration, with item 5.1, draft transportation level of service policy CS 7204.
Thank you, Chair. I brought Ms. Bouchard to go through her transit study and level of service report.
Good afternoon, through the chair to members of council. This report is before committee following the direction from Committee of the Whole on March 12th, 2024. Following March 12th, administration investigated options of delivering public transit in-house and contract Canada. In-house service, which is operations, fleet, fuel, and maintenance costs, would be about 15% cheaper, approximately $22,000 to $25,000 savings annually. Comparable public transit communities were consulted within the province, looking at their operations model, fleet type, route model, their 2023 ridership, and their 2023 deficit, which is in their report for on attachment 6. Currently, gasoline is being the preferred choice in fleet rather than diesel, hybrid, or electric, for the following reasons noted in the report at this time. A community bus would be the suggested fleet model and is what we currently operate right now in the public transit system. With the community bus supports our current passenger demand and other technicalities that can be referred to in attachment 5, page 34 on table 11, the fleet comparison. Lastly, administration looked into options to reduce costs and increase revenues outside of transit fleet supply and maintenance, including contracting out for diesel or hybrid bus supply and maintenance, or moving the supply and maintenance in-house. Considering viable options to increase ridership that ultimately would increase revenues was initiated by using the 2018 data study, the 2024 public transit survey results, as well as the data from 2023 and 2024 ridership and bus stop demand. From there, a more efficient route was developed, which is shown in the report, attachment 8, and is part of the option 1A as well as the other 3 options. Seeking direction from council to formalize a transportation level of service with consideration of the resources that administration has provided in the report. There's minimal cost implications associated with the recommended action. The $6,950 could be found within the current 2025 operating budget, with a predicted ridership income and not offset the increased costs. With increased frequency and efficiency of the transit loop, enhanced hours of service would also meet the needs of the working demographic and ensure the service would be in operation during peak times. Administration requests that committee refer the draft level service policy CS 7204 to a future council meeting for decision with option 1B. And thank you for your time. And that's any questions.
Council. Councilor Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 261, it says the fleet type would remain the same, and that's the third bullet down. Because I didn't really know this.
Yeah. So thank you through to the chair. Yeah, so that's the community bus staff.
Thank you.
Councilor Chambers.
Thank you through the chair. In the transit road proposal, I noticed that the changes is to remove the stop number 13 at the Lions Manor, but retaining, and you still have the visitor information center and then the Legion stops, which are closed. I do have a lot of concerns about that, specifically some of the ability of the Lions Manor residents to get to those bus stops. Some of the ridership, it looks like from the ridership comparisons that the Lions Manor stop is used more than the Legion stop. From the numbers that I've seen from looking at the right thing, there's lots of information. So I just have concerns about that. A lot of people will move into the Lions Manor and they will get rid of their car because they have that ability to get on that bus stop. They can get there with their walker. It's accessible. Some of them use Freedom Express as well, obviously. But just questions about that decision specifically, because I don't think, I look at a piece of paper, it's like, oh, they can go to Green Square and they go to, you know, there's relatively close, but that block, I think, could be a big barrier.
Thank you, through to the chair. So yes, we had lots of conversation actually about removing all of the stops. This one specifically, I chatted with the transportation drivers when we did the route, and the transportation drivers are very familiar with the ridership and the regular riders. And so the regular riders are quite independent in that area. The ones that are not as mobile actually use the Freedom Express. So that was our decision with that.
Thank you. I myself and Hugh next. If I've missed it, just help me out because it's probably in there. When we look at page 2 of 6 of the report, and it references the previous directions from Committee of the Whole. One of the common threads is to reduce costs. So when I looked at the recommended option of 1B as it appears on page, just give me a sec. This part would be on page 4 of 6. The total approximate cost increase to the 1B option for this year, and this is where I'm hoping I'm wrong, is $6,950. I'm assuming an increase. Is there an expectation in the next year after that the cost is going to come down?
Thank you, through to the chair. So that would be the prediction. So what the goal would be in this change in route is so that we're catching some higher number of regular users. We have our regular users, but with our long route. So that's why we wanted to decrease it by 20 minutes. And then also catching those peak times and catching the times where people are going to work in the mornings. So then, if you look in the survey results, we're catching a lot of people that are using the bus for social and recreation. Whereas when we change the hours, we can then catch that greater demographic of the working, which then will hopefully build momentum to increase ridership every year. That eventually, of course, brings in more revenue.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, please,
Just
CAO.
to add to that as well. Part of what we proposed as well is bringing fleet in-house, which is about a 50% savings to the actual fleet itself. So I think it was 22 to 25,000 dollars. It's an estimated savings by bringing that in-house. We do have a grant outstanding right now that if we were successful, we could use that grant to actually use the capital or pay for the buses, at least on a capital basis, and then save us a little bit of money in operation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Councillor Taylor.
So our deficit for next year, according to this report, seems to be $320,000. Which of these options, that's what I think direction to reduce costs be, is how much are we going to reduce the deficit next year and year after that? So which of these four options reduce the deficit and by how much? That was the direction I think we were given to come back with.
Thank you, through to the chair. So I think choosing the proposal of any option at the minimum of just the shorter route is the less riskiest, but would increase ridership, which would then ultimately decrease the deficit. So all of the options propose a predicted increase, which would bring in the revenue. Option 2 and 3 have a greater cost with on-demand. So over time, and again, that ridership, the regular riders with the new transit route will take some time. So within that year, that's when you're going to build your new demographic of riders. So then your deficit won't be overnight, but it will slowly become lower. That's going to the deficit is going to be happen. Sorry, the revenue is going to be maybe less if you choose on-demand because there's a greater cost to both of those options right from the start. But both options are predicted to decrease the deficit a little bit.
And follow up.
Yeah, and then I'll go to the CAO. I saw he wanted to respond as well.
So our deficit this year is 250,000 and our deficit next year is 320,000. So why, if these options reduce the deficit, does it go up 7,000 for next year? Because this year it was 354,879 expenses minus growth revenue of 71,700. And then somewhere in this report, the deficit says the deficit for 2025 is 320,000. So that's a significant increase. It's not a decrease.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm not sure in the report where it says 320,000.
Mr. Chair, it's option A, 1A, fixed route. First bullet point says 2025 budget deficit 320,642. I think that's it.
Whatever.
Thank you, referring to.
Thank you, Councillor Oskashik.
So yeah, thank you, through the chair. So that would be, that deficit would be with our current level of service right now. Not the proposal of 1A, 1B, or the other options. So the predicted deficit, should you choose any of the options, would be, the deficit is predicted to be at least a little bit less.
Councillor Taylor, I'll allow you one more clarification, then I'll go to the queue.
So since we're in the budget process, we picked one of these options. Does that mean we can go for a lower cost of the transit system in our budget and perhaps make our tax rate more competitive? So it wouldn't be 320, it would be 390, 280 for subsidy. And therefore we don't have to have the tax increase as high. So that's what you're saying.
I'm gonna go to the CAO. CAO?
Through the chair and members of council, and to the latest point, 320 is based on what we have today. If we're going to see any savings, like Ms. Bouchard mentioned, these things take time, especially with transit, for people to get used to a new system to increase ridership. This is a slow roll. Any savings I would see as a result of bringing in a fleet in-house probably isn't going to happen, or we're certainly not going to realize any savings this year. So I think that 320 is it's relatively locked in. I think for the upcoming, there may be some small variations based on those projections, but with the option that we've recommended when it comes to budget, we recommended it based on we can find some savings and we can provide a better product. But all options, if council's more concerned with the cost of any of the services, all of the options as presented can be amended in order to save money, right? That's a level of service discussion that we can have today. We can certainly look at reductions to the service, but if we wanted to look at both, how do we make it work better and save a little bit of money? But as you can see, doing both, you don't see a major impact to either one of those sides.
Thank you. So good try. I can just add to that. So right now, our ridership is actually 2,000 increase. Right now, and last year it wasn't even there yet. So it's probably predicted that we're going to be like around 30,000 riders at the end of the year. So what we do every year when we're planning the budget, obviously we base our revenue based on our ridership from year to year. So, there's some risk of when, we predict that revenue. So that's where you would see our overall deficit for 2025 at 320. Sometimes it's hard to predict that ridership, but there's certainly an increasing trend in the ridership, and predicted that it would continue to increase, especially with the shorter route and the catching those peak hours.
Councillor Race, then Councillor Haas.
Thank you, sir. So I wanted to ask you, I have a bus stop just outside of my house. There's nobody standing there. They just drive right by. So, and when I ride the bus, if there's nobody at that bus stop, any bus stop, they just keep going. So you think that by removing bus stops for people who aren't there often, that will give us a 40-minute route?
Thank you, through the chair. So yes, the common practice, and I can only speak to, like, for myself, that all the drivers are to stop at the bus stop, even for a couple seconds, to ensure that there's nobody in the area that are coming to the stop. So that's a common practice that is reminded. In addition to that,
Just go ahead.
yes, we did the route. So I did the full route with the transportation drivers. We timed it based on the route change, and it actually can be done under 40 minutes, but we allowed that time for the train and weather permitting and construction, and so yeah.
I'm sure they did stop, and I was just talking about something. But yeah, can you put me back in?
I can, Councillor Rice. Councillor Hawes.
Granted, yeah, we can't, it's hard to assume how much more ridership, but I mean, we do surveys, and I guess based on those, with the change of hours, because I think I really do agree. I mean, one of the biggest things that we've heard is the ability to get employees to work at reasonable times. But based on our surveys and stuff, what would be a ballpark expectation of increased ridership with the change of earlier hours, taking people to work, and later hours bringing them home? Any comment on what the surveys might have suggested?
Thank you, through the chair. I think a good ridership, just even talking to other communities and based on their population, like Whitecourt, their ridership is about 35,000. Yeah, I think that would be a good annual ridership to hit. I think it's doable. We're at 28,000 right now. So that's where I think a good goal would be.
Okay, thank you. Which, sorry, if I can follow up, which goes to that, I realize, the deficit it is, but, it is potentially have over time, a reduction of some degree, but at the same time, I mean, transit is one of those things that I'm sure all communities subsidize to a certain extent, right? So, but I thank you for that. I think 35 is a reasonable amount, so thank you.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, sir. So I've talked to people who live on Collins, the far west end of Collins. And that's a hike for them to get to their bus stop, whether it's the, kind of the lower Collins or the top. So has there been any consideration to putting a bus stop at the west end of Collins?
Thank you, through the chair. We did have those conversations when we were looking at the route. I think our goal right now would be to increase the frequency of the route, so to get it shorter, find our demographic, our stronger riders. There's two bus stops, right, as you know, on the lower and the upper, and that's where we wanted to keep it right now. There was a conversation that I did have with the drivers too, the full-time drivers of consideration of potentially putting one, in the middle. But I mean, when we're looking at, decreasing time and unsure about the ridership right now and wanting those are avenues that we could look at, should, our ridership increase, people start using it, the 40-minute loop. So we did have those conversations, but didn't think that it was an avenue to take at this time.
I just want to say, I like riding the bus, I like, the bus drivers and meeting all the people, but it takes me a half an hour from my house to do that loop to get to where I'm going. Then I only got to be there 10 minutes, and then I got to sit for 50. So I'm happy with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik and myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with option 1B, the recommended option, the increased cost of $6,950. It will be offset by some additional revenue, but there's no estimate of what that additional revenue might be, correct?
Thank you, through the chair. That is correct. Even the revenue that we predicted for 2024 is higher than what we anticipated when we were budgeting back in 2023, and our ridership is now higher. So I budgeted a little bit lower. So I think we could probably even offset these costs with not even a high increase in ridership. So the risk is pretty low. I'm pretty confident that we would be able to offset those costs. Again, we don't have the exact dollar amount, but like I was saying before, with the trend of it continuing to increase.
I can follow up,
please.
So to fully offset the 6,950, what are you saying?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik, myself and Councillor Taylor. At the risk of sounding a little extreme, this is one of my concerns, is that When we were discussing this as a council, originally a committee of the whole, one of the things council was looking for was cost savings, and now that we've seen the initial budget projections, and some of the initial numbers that are being tossed around with the draft budget, that's more so my concern, is really looking for not just, potential cost savings after we've added $6,000 or $7,000 to the overall cost. How do we significantly establish some savings for the community? At least that's for myself. And the CAO had mentioned level of service impacts, and that's where council should be focused is, what do we offer as a community? And then ultimately, how does that impact the bottom line? Has administration discussed what, in order to achieve significant budget savings within the realm of transit, like, for example, something to the tune of, and forgive me on ballparking, $30,000, because that's a sizable chunk given the overall budget, what impact that would have on level of service? And if not, what sort of time would admin need to tell council what impact that would have on level of service?
Just, so that's after we brought it in-house, let's assuming that we're right in around that 30,000 mark to 25. So to reduce the services in order to get approximately $30,000 savings. At the end of the day.
Yeah, I think so. And it was as a sort of understanding where I'm coming from with that. Because one of the things I'm looking at with, say, 1B as an example, is that it identifies that, over the course, we would achieve savings of approximately, it would be 15% cheaper, approximately 22 to 25,000 in savings annually. But I think the big but there is that the next bullet down says owning the fleet would have an increase of approximately $30,000 to capital annually in order to replace that bus. So, essentially the way it feels is you're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's like, you're saving on the operational side of the budget, but ultimately you've got to put more money away to replace that capital investment over the long term. So again, the net impact to the municipality over the long term really isn't that much different, right? So.
Thank you through the chair. Our current contract with Transdev is around 36,000 around there, and we are getting like bottom line buses. And so that impacts a variety of things, right? People just wanting to jump on the bus, right? Visually, operators, right? Just, buses breaking down. So I think with moving the transit or the fleet in-house, yes, there's going to be that offset of cost, but you're going to have like bus replacements. We have it with the Freedom Express. And so I have that comparison of, a driver's operating the Freedom Express, us being able to use our mechanics in-house, the cleaning, everything. There's a far greater experience when we're owning and operating our own fleet. And just the look and state of it.
But I guess if I could get clarification on my original question, is there a way to affect the level of service? Like, and as an example, this might not be an answer, but just trying to help out a little bit. Maybe it means not a 40-minute loop. Maybe it means, an hour and 20-minute loop to achieve cost savings. You know what I mean? Is there a way to achieve some significant cost savings through level of service that way? CAO?
Yeah, and I would, I think there's some unique considerations that anything that I'll say, but I'll say generally for levels of service, when the bus is running, we're pretty locked into how much it costs.
Okay.
So really what we're talking about is, reducing the amount of time that bus is running, reducing the amount of hours is, driving it around. So really, I think it's more or less the reduction of hours that's going to make an impact here. So if there is some direction that if council wants to look at options for some cost savings, that's, some general direction on, hour reduction.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I'd like to direct administration to develop options for the transportation service that has an annual deficit of $260,000 per year or less. And the reason why I picked that number is that's the deficit from last year, and it's going up $320,000, which is a 25% increase. And so I'd like to see options. I don't want to restrict you to what those options are. They might be restricted hours. It might be something else that we haven't even thought of that somebody else is doing. My concern is that according to the transportation review done in the 2022 AUMA booklet that all of us got, that only 4 out of 15 communities provide a public transportation service like we do. 9 of 15 provide a transportation service for people with physical or intellectual disabilities or seniors. And so we're providing something that not a lot of people provide. And then according to the information that was provided in the open house, when you looked at our transportation costs versus the 4 comparables that you got, our transportation costs were dramatically higher. And here we are, the costs are increasing by 25%. So we're providing a costly service that a lot of communities our size don't provide. That's why I'm suggesting this as a potential consensus.
Councillor Taylor, just to confirm, was that a consensus that you put forward?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So we'll make sure that Ms. Davy Campbell's got it written down accurately. Councillor Hawes, I have you in queue next. Do you want to? Okay, I will reserve your spot as top when we come back to it.
Direct or consensus for administration to develop options for a transportation service that has an annual deficit of $260,000 per year or less. And that's, I've rounded that up to the nearest 10 of what our deficit was in the information I was sent today in the email.
And that was to develop a transportation service?
Yeah, develop seek consensus to develop options for a transportation service that has an annual deficit of $260,000 per year or less. I don't want to see the cost keep going up by 25% per year. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, if you could just one more time slowly for Ms. Davy.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We're missing some pieces.
The committee seek consensus to develop options for a transportation service. There we go. That has an annual deficit of $260,000 per year or less. Thank you.
And that captures your consensus?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Council, we do have a consensus request on the floor. Councillor Eustache.
Mr. Chair, I have a clarifying question. The 260,000 per year that's stated in that motion, can I ask where that came from?
I'd be happy to provide it, but sure. I got an email this morning when I asked my information, and it's the difference between the expenses and the revenues that I received by email from the town manager. We all got about it.
You didn't check my email, it's busy. Is that for 2024?
Well, that's what I don't know what year it is. I don't know what year it is. It doesn't say what year it is.
CAO, just for clarification, is there anything you want to add to that?
Through the chair, I have to check what I.
Okay, so that's fair. Okay, yeah, please do.
Because the report states in the public transit community comparisons, Hinton's 2023 deficit was 283,183, which is significantly higher than that.
Councillor Taylor.
I'll read you what I got this morning. Capital costs are included in the numbers below. We have very minimal capital costs currently. Net cost of service deficit, 283,179. And gross revenues, net cost of service, 283,000. And that's gross expenses of 354,879 minus gross revenues of 171,700. So net costs of net cost of service, I should probably make the amount I should make that is 283. I'm asking. So my intent is not to put an unfair burden on it, but it's keep the costs from going up. So 283.
Council, any concerns with that slight modification with Councillor Taylor's math?
My intent was not to make it much higher than what we're doing this year. My intent was to have a system that we keep running at roughly the same cost.
Council, I do just want to check one more time, simply because that is a slight modification. Is there any concerns with clarifying that number? Start early on, I'm comfortable with that. Okay, seeing none. Ms. Bouchard, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I just want to add the increase from 2023. So the only increase that would be in the 2025 budget would just be the COLA. We didn't make any other increases in the overall budget from budget 2023, budget 2024, and budget 2025. After the transportation permit, there is no increases that was in.
Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am a bit confused and sorry, because the number stated in the report is 283,000 for deficit for 2023 deficit, but then the projected deficit for 2025 is 320,000. That's a big difference if it's just all increases over 2 years.
CAO.
If I could, they are 2 years apart, and I believe that 23 numbers were used because we got the actuals. So the actuals and budget projections are going to be a little bit different. So I believe that's the reason, and this is contract and labor heavy. So we don't have a whole bunch of different costs for this one. Like primarily the costs that we incur on this service is the cost of our budget contract and labor, right? There's a whole bunch of other things that are mixed in. So, you know, things like labor costs changes are going to affect us disproportionately to maybe some other things we do. But over the course of a couple of years, when it comes to the net costs, it's a big change, but I think it's within that realm.
Councillor Stashik, did you have anything else you wanted to clarify before I move on?
No, that's good for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haas.
Thank you. So my understanding though is option 1A projects a deficit of $320,000 at our current rate of service. Correct? If we didn't do anything this evening and we said status quo, then that's possibly that 320,000 deficit for 2025, correct? Okay. But if we were to pick 1B, that number is not 320,000. We don't know what that number will be potentially, but with the increase of ridership expected, the decrease or the change in hours, the reduction of from 40 minutes, there's still 40 minutes, but it's the service hours. We don't know what that deficit is going to be at this point in time, but theoretically, it should be less than 320. Correct?
Thank you through the chair. That is correct.
Okay. So, all right, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, then myself.
Yeah, but we still have to have a number in the budget that we use, and that's going to increase the tax rate. But that number isn't necessarily high, and it's affects current and future generations of taxpayers.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I have myself up next. I'm going to support the consensus request on the floor because I'd like to see what those options look like. The only way of exploring a level of service impact is to see what it actually looks like. And for myself, at the very worst, if it's unpalatable, I can at least talk to citizens about why it's unpalatable. Right now, I'm sort of guessing. So for myself, it'll provide me with some information to know what that level of service might look like. Councillor Chambers, then Councillor Race. Oh, I apologize. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification on Councillor Haas's question about the difference between option 1 and 1B. My understanding is 1B is increased hours of service, which is why there's a $6,000 cost, correct? So if the budget deficit with the current hours of service is 320,642, should 1B not be $6,000 more than that?
Thank you, through the chair. So when we budget for, when I budgeted for 2025, it was the budget for our normal 1 hour membership. Now, say if we did the 40-minute loop, the predicted ridership would be to increase, so then we would increase that revenue in the revenue line in our budget for 2025. And so that.
Yep.
I'm confused. 1A says frequency of 40 minutes. 1A and 1B are both frequency of 40 minutes, but 1B is increased service hours.
So the
Am I missing something?
So the service hours of 1B is the increase in the 10 to 12 hours. Because we're now making this service from Monday to Saturday. Yeah. And so with the increase in the service hours, we're predicting that the ridership's going to increase and the revenue is going to increase along with the new route. So then I would budget for a bit of an increase of that revenue, which would be the 6,950. And then the budget would be the same for 2025.
CAO.
Just to add to that, 1A, it's 40-minute loop, it's a change of service, but the hours are still the same. So, you know, the labor costs are still, everything's still the same. We're just, you know, we're doing our loop a little bit more often. 1B is a little bit of a change to just expand the hours that we're actually operating.
Councillor Stashik, if you please.
Right, and that expanded hours according to the proposed budget is total 6,950, but 950 of that is for training, which is also in 1A. So the increased cost is 6,000 more for 1B than it is for 1A, huh?
CAO.
We were looking at net costs and with an expanded hours to get all of the workers on the, you know, from that early morning to the going at night, those expanded hours we think will be very close to a wash on those items. Because when we're budgeting, we're not budgeting down to hundreds of dollars, right? These are large budgets with, these are projected, you know, projections that we're hoping to hit. So we don't expect to see a major, any major change with expanded hours, because we do think that we're going to get a lot more riders for to get that working class for 1B. So there is more expenses, but we're looking at, I believe that the number you're speaking about on total cost on a net basis, when you include the revenues that we're going to be looking at, it's going to be very close to a wash.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm not considering revenues because I asked earlier what the increased revenue, if there's a budget amount, what the increases in revenue is going to be. I was told there isn't a budget, so I'm not considering it because we don't know what it is. I'm just looking at total net cost. Increased net cost for 1A is $950. Increase in net cost for 1B was $6,950. So to me, that would increase the budget deficit $6,000. And so we go from 1A states that it's 320,642. 1B would be 326,600. I'm not sure. The response to Councillor Hawes was that budget deficit number would go down with an increased level of service, and I'm not sure how that maths out. I don't get that.
CAO?
The intent with 1B is it will if we go for the full 1B when it comes to bringing our everything in house. That's where you see the savings. Everything else, if we continue on a contract basis, we don't really expect any changes if we can see some higher ridership. If we are successful in getting a grant or some buses, eventually bring this in-house, we'll see some cost savings over a period of time. Maybe not all of those realized in next year's budget, but likely 26.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers, Race, then the mayor.
Yeah, so just again, through the chair for my clarity. So essentially you guys have done budgeted for 1B increase in the hours of service, but you haven't really realized the full amount or realized any of the revenue because it's just too fluid in the prediction of that part. But so you're assuming the same level of deficit essentially for when you're running both programs, because you're expecting them to net out with the savings of bringing it in-house and the additional ridership. That one right? Okay. Then I will be supporting the consensus on the table.
Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too will not be supporting the consensus from the board. I think administration is working hard to give us a transit system that works for our citizens. You know, we're saying to people, we can help you once a year to help us out, but we're not going to get you to work like we want. So this is giving them an opportunity, a better opportunity to get to work. I feel really bad for the 4 municipalities, I don't know who they are, who do not have a busing system. Maybe they don't have that the valley, the flats, the hill like we have. So they're dealing with something probably different than we are, except for white work. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor, then myself.
Thank you. And through the chair of the committee, I'm not going to be supporting the consensus on the table. I find that setting a deficit target is it's a confusing and awkward way to move forward with this. I've heard a lot of confusion around the table about the expenses and the costs for the service and comparing that to the deficit costs in past services. The reality is we have no idea what the deficit's going to be this year. We don't know what the ridership is. We don't know what the revenues are. And admin is going through and making reasonable assumptions for our budget process. But the reality is we won't know what our ridership revenues will be until we have those ridership revenues. And the numbers are effectively pretty close. There's nothing to indicate here that we're not going to end up with the same deficit as years past. I'd much rather govern towards a level of service. And if that level of service has a cost that's higher than council is willing to spend, I'd like to go back to a discussion of that level of service. I'm concerned that if we were to move forward on a deficit target like this, who knows what decisions we would make, but it would necessitate likely a reduction in the level of service, which likely come with a reduction in revenues and may come with an increase in deficit. And that's the thing about deficits. So I'm not in support of this motion. Again, I'm in support of governing transit through level of service. Thank you.
Put myself on next. I think level of service is important, and that's exactly what Councillor Taylor's direction seeks to achieve. It puts it in the hands of administration to establish what might a level of service look like, given the fact that this is one of those services the town of Hinton offers that you just won't break even on. It's like our swimming pool, our rec center. It's a very expensive thing to offer Now, Councillor Race, you had mentioned something about number of communities that offer this. I may have heard you wrong. We're one of the few municipalities in the province that do offer this level of service, and that does come with a cost. I think what we have to be careful of is that cost, we are in control of it moving forward. Everybody wants a premium level of service, but we have to balance that against what it costs the taxpayers. And again, there's nothing in this consensus request that Councillor Taylor has put forward that binds council to even the draft budget right now. All it says is, what do those options look like? And rather proceed forward knowing what our options are. Because if admin comes back and they say, well, in order to achieve this, it's going to cost you 3 days of service, and the community says, no, that's untenable, we can't do that, then council can say, well, then you need to pay this much money. But it's clear cut, it's on the table, and people know what it costs them. I don't think proceeding forward without information for the community is the best practice. That's just for myself. Councillor Ostashik.
Mr. Chair, because it would affect my decision about whether I want to support this or not, I have a question for administration regarding moving the transit service to in-house. What kind of a timeline are we looking at if that's the direction that we want to take moving forward?
Through the chair, I believe that we would be looking at making the decision sometime in 2025, likely we'll say midway through 2025, probably by the time it's fully operational, you're into 2026.
Considering trying to map that too, so if we are successful in our expression of interest for the federal funding, we had a meeting late last week and they would release the funds April 1st, 2026. We should hear right away if we are successful, and then the purchase of the fleet stuff would then begin with receiving, the fleet.
Please.
I don't think that that's too long a timeline. I don't think it's unrealistic. And because of that, I won't be supporting this. I think there's some value in getting an in-house bus service. It could realize additional revenue from ridership, because I've been comments, and I've heard it actually here tonight already, that some people don't want to ride the bus because it is bottom of the line bus. It's not a nice bus. It's not a nice ride. It's rattly. It's loud. If we had a modern fleet of buses, I think ridership would go up because people would be more interested in riding a modern, comfortable, quiet bus. And I think the offset expenses by bringing it in-house helps to balance the cost of it. And I think we can see some successes with that, especially if there's some grant funding available to buses with to help offset the cost of them. I think there's value in taking it that way and to be able to move forward for a year without sending administration back to the table to do a bunch of additional research to come up with what might amount to $20,000 in savings, maybe less, maybe more. I think it's worth it. I prefer to just make a decision and move ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council, I have no one else in queue, so seeing none. Jen, if we could have that up so that we can call it for question. So that committee seek consensus to develop options for a transportation service that has an annual deficit of $283,000 a year or less. Council, if you can please vote electronically now. And that is defeated with 5 against, with Councillor Taylor and Magoon voting in favor. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, I'd like to make take the recommended action. The committee refer the draft level of service policy CS 7204 for the transportation to a future council meeting for decision with option B. And I'm just going to quickly speak to it. the in-house, I agree, fully with Councillor Stashik. I've always questioned the fact that we're contracting and the amount of money that we're spending on contracted services. I feel strongly that this should be an in-house thing with that will bring savings. It'll bring, you know, a better service, I believe, to the transit system. And the fact that you've also looked at increasing the ridership, again, as I agree, it may be more hours, but it's accommodating more ridership, you know, when people using that. Plus, that'll help too, because, you know, right now they're probably getting to work financially through taxis and things, and taxis are not the cheapest in our community to use as well. So I see that as a benefit. So with that, that's why I'm putting forward this direction at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. I have the mayor.
Thank you. And through the chair to committee, I'm going to be in favor of this action at this time. I think the potential for increased ridership is likely to offset the slight increased cost for running this option. And I am curious, along with Councillors Ostashik and Haas, I would like to see an in-house transit program, but I'm also curious to see what the change of hours does to our ridership. I'm very curious to see if, should this pass through council eventually, what the change in ridership is, especially in those extended evening hours. Thank you very much.
Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also going to be speaking in favor of motion. I'm in support of option 1B. I feel that the increase of about $6,000 over a current level of service is reasonable, considering that is to extend hours based on feedback that we got from the public of the people who actually use that service, who said that would be a better service if this happened, that happened, and that turned into extended hours, which I feel comes at a pretty minimal cost, $6,000 to be able to satisfy what the people who use that service on a regular basis want. I think that's perfectly appropriate, and that's why I'm in support of it. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
I don't support it. I feel we're providing a costly service that a lot of towns don't provide. And in my mind, we haven't done enough to try to reduce the cost of the service. Thanks.
Put myself in queue next. I'm on the fence on this one, but the way ultimately I believe I'm going to end up is I will not be supporting the direction for the level of service. The genesis of this in its first place was to find cost savings, not to find ways to spend additional money. I do appreciate the look by administration at improving the ride schedule to make sure it's more conducive for our ridership. And ultimately, I do agree with the fact that we will probably benefit over the long term at bringing this service in-house. But ultimately, the thing I don't see reflected in the level of service policy that's important for me, especially given this budgetary year, is cost savings. And that was the genesis of this report for myself. So I just can't support it at this time. Councillor Ostashik and then Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just speaking to the philosophy of a community our size offering public transit. I'm in agreement actually with what Councillor Taylor said. If this was a brand new thing that was coming forward for something that we wanted to initiate, I probably wouldn't support it. It's very expensive. It's a huge budget deficit every year to the tune of about, I think it's about 2.5% of in terms of tax increases. But the fact is, we have it. We have it now. We've had it for a long time, and a big portion of our community has come to rely on that service. So if we're going to offer that service, I think we need to offer it correctly. I don't think we can afford, and I don't think it's responsible to the people that use it to say, yes, we're going to initiate a service. Here's a new service that you guys can have. And then several years later, whittle it back so far that it's next to useless, or that the buses that are being in use are broke down rattle traps that nobody wants to ride. The reality is we have transit in Hinton, and we have an obligation to make sure that it's adequate and appropriate. And I think this is the most responsible way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you through the chair. I echo a lot of Councillor Stashik's comments. I think we did the survey. I think we have an accountability to listen to the survey. I think we were provided with an option that essentially nets out in a very, very reasonable fashion. And I think that while other communities don't provide it, I think what it has done for the town of Hinton and specific residents with the way our town's laid out. I have people coming to me and saying, I can't apply for a job at this place because my start time is here. I can only work in the valley, or I can only work at these places because I can't get there. Those are a lot of the comments I was getting individually, and I think this is reasonable. And sometimes you have to spend a little money to make money. We need to have an efficient service. It's not always about just cutting back, and it's having a service that people want to use, that it's responsible, that looks at the needs of the community. And I do believe that if we create a program that people want to use, we're going to see that ridership, we're going to get the revenues, but we're not going to get more revenues by reducing the service. We're just going to end up running it into the ground, and that would be a shame to lose something, because there's a lot of families that are relying on it more than ever. So I'm definitely in support of it, and I think option 1B is responsible to move ahead with.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, sir. I will be supporting this consensus ask. I really feel we're moving in a really positive direction with this. And I have spoken with people who, because we have transit, we have freedom from their house. They're able to get out of their house, get to the mall, get to them. It's been a lifesaver for people, and I would hate to move in a direction where we won't be that. So thank you, sir.
Council? I have no one else in the speakers queue. Seeing none, we will call that to question. If you can please vote electronically now. And that is carried 5-2 with councillors Taylor and Magoon against. Mr. Mayor? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we will call 5 minutes. Let's give everybody let's give 7. People stretch their legs. It's been a long one already, so we'll reconvene at 6:38.